Hey guys, tonight we're not just looking down at dusty roads or crumbling ruins, we're tilting our heads all the way up. The night sky hangs heavy above you, a black canvas punctured by white fire, and somewhere out there a long-tailed comet drifts silently as it has for millennia. You don't have to squint very hard to imagine what this looked like to people long before telescopes, Netflix, or even the luxury of knowing that it wouldn't crash into your house. A streak of light appearing out of nowhere. If you're a farmer in a mud brick house by the Euphrates, that's not space dust. That's the God sending an urgent memo, and to be fair, you probably wouldn't survive this world without taking those omens seriously. Forget ignoring your horoscope. In Babylon, shrugging at a comet might mean your neighbors think you're dooming the king, and no one wants to be blamed for that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location and the local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through ancient Mesopotamia, the smell of wet clay and roasting barley hanging in the night air. Priests in tall conical hats shuffle across the ziggurat steps, clutching waxed tablets and styluses. Every twitch in the heavens is worth recording. Eclipses, unusual stars, and, most especially, comets. To the Babylonians, comets are never just background decoration or omens of upheaval. Wars, famines, royal death sits all wrapped up in the sudden blaze across the sky. Mainstream fact: cuneiform tablets dating back as far as the 7th century. TCU include meticulous notes about these celestial visitors. They weren't casual observers. They linked comets to concrete events on Earth, believing heaven and earth were stitched together in a single cosmic fabric. Quirky tidbit: some tablets describe comets as hairy stars. You imagine an ancient scholar tilting his head, scratching his beard, and muttering, "Yep, that one looks shaggy." It's oddly charming, even if you'd prefer your astral events hairless. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians genuinely thought gods were hurling these fiery intruders, or whether the priests cleverly used them as tools of power. Imagine telling your king, "Hairy star says you'd better listen to me." Either way, the comet becomes more than a streak in the sky. It becomes politics, prophecy, and public relations rolled into one. You picture a village huddled outside their walls, staring up in terror as a glowing tail slashes the heavens. Children clutch their mothers, old men mutter prayers, and somewhere a priest is already calculating how best to spin this to the king's advantage. Maybe he says it warns of enemies marching from the north. Maybe it's a sign the gods demand more temple offerings. Either way, the interpretation matters as much as the comet itself. As you stand on the ziggurat's terrace, the warm wind tugging your robe, you realize how deeply these people wove the sky into their lives. Crops, floods, politics all had heavenly footnotes. To them, looking up was never idle stargazing. It was survival, a nightly news broadcast written in light. And tonight, as you let the comet's tail stretch across your imagination, you can almost feel their awe, the blend of fear and wonder. The sense that the universe had a message just for them. Asterisk, you leave the dusty plains of Mesopotamia behind and drift south, where the Nile snakes across a land that has always tied sky and soil together. Here in Egypt, the stars aren't just pretty, they are calendars, maps, and divine whispers all rolled into one. You stand at the edge of the riverbank, papyrus reeds swaying in the night breeze, and look up. The sun itself, to these people, is no ordinary ball of light. It is Ra, a god who sails across the sky in a golden boat every day, fighting off serpents of chaos by night. When a solar eclipse strikes, it isn't an astronomical alignment. No one here is muttering about orbital mechanics. It's Ra himself being attacked, his sunboat swallowed by the serpent Apep. The sky darkens. The air grows tense, and villagers gather in anxious silence, convinced the world might actually unravel. Mainstream fact: Egyptian texts and later Greek reports describe priests rushing to perform rituals during eclipses, drumming, chanting, and burning offerings to help Ra overcome his nightly battle. Without their intervention, the cosmic order mat, as they called it, could collapse. Quirky tidbit. Some sources suggest people banged pots or shouted into the sky, as if a cosmic cheer squad could scare off a giant serpent. You can almost imagine the scene. Grand priests in leopard skin robes conducting solemn rites while nearby an anxious farmer yells at the heavens like it's a misbehaving donkey. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly saw eclipses as terrifying, world-ending events, or whether those interpretations came later through Greek retellings. Either way, the eclipse was no casual spectacle. It was a drama played across the heavens, demanding human participation. As the eclipse deepens, you imagine the hush spreading across the desert. Markets stop. Markets stom to their mothers. The great temples at Karnak and Luxor glow with torchlight as priests chant. Voices echoing against columns carved with stories of gods and pharaohs. The smell of burning resin curls upward, as if smoke itself is hurrying to assist Ra. And then, slowly, light returns. The serpent is defeated, the sun freed, and cheers ripple through the crowd. Belief tastes almost sweet, like honey beer after a long day, but not all celestial events are so menacing. Egyptians also track the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star they call Soptit. Each year, just before the Nile's inundation, Sirius rises at dawn, announcing the floods that bring fertile silt. That bright spark isn't a warning, it's a promise, a reassurance that the cycle of life continues. Standing in the temple courtyard, you sense how the Egyptians lived in a rhythm tied directly to sky patterns. Comets, eclipses, bright stars, they weren't random events. They were woven threads in a tapestry where gods and humans tugged together at the same cloth. And as you glance up again, the desert cooling around you, you realize how much they leaned on the heavens, not just for fear, but for comfort. The stars above were as much home as the Nile below. Asterisk from the Nile, you drift north and west, until marble columns rise around you and the salty Aegean breeze carries the smell of olives and roasted lamb. Greece, land of philosophers and storytellers, is also the land of people squinting suspiciously at the sky. You sit on a stone step near the agora, watching as men in linen chitons wave their arms, arguing about whether that streak in the heavens is fire, air, or some kind of wandering star that's lost its way. For the Greeks, the sky is a laboratory. Of sorts, though, instead of lab coats, you've got beards and sandals. Pythagoras muses that comets are planets visiting on odd paths. Aristotle, always confident, insists they're fiery exhalations, sort of cosmic burps from the atmosphere. To be fair, you wouldn't survive trying to fact-check Aristotle to his face. He had a knack for making his guesses sound like gospel mainstream fact. Aristotle's claim that comets were sublunary, that is, below the moon, and part of Earth's atmosphere, dominated European thought for nearly 1,500 years. When Aristotle spoke, people tended to nod, even if the evidence didn't quite add up. Quirky tidbit, ancient writers sometimes described comets as torchbearers. Imagine the night sky as a giant Olympic Games, the comets jogging by carrying celestial flashlights. While philosophers furiously debate whether they should count as athletes, historians still argue whether the Greeks leaned more towards superstition or rational curiosity. On one hand, philosophers sought natural explanations. On the other, common folk often saw omens of war or disaster. Thucydides, writing about the Peloponnesian War, notes that an eclipse unsettled soldiers before battle. No matter how clever your theory, fear clung tightly when the sun went dark. You wander into a small amphitheater where villagers sit anxiously, eyes skyward. An eclipse unfolds, and panic spreads. Mothers clutch children. Sailors refuse to launch their ships, and the priestess of Apollo urges calm. Somewhere in the background, a philosopher scribbles notes, probably muttering, "Atmospheric vapors, I tell you." The tension between myth and reason defines Greece's celestial interpretations. The gods still meddle. Zeus might hurl a comet to signal his disapproval, Apollo might darken the sun in anger. Yet the stirrings of science are undeniable. The Greeks invent star charts, debate orbital models, and inch closer to astronomy as we know it. You picture yourself reclining under a fig tree after a long debate. The warm night alive with crickets. Overhead, the Milky Way stretches like spilled milk, and somewhere in its haze, a comet blazes. Is it a god's warning, or just another hairy star with no agenda? The Greeks can't quite agree. And that uncertainty gives the night a strangely modern feeling. Half myth, half science, all wonder. You leave the olive groves of Greece and step into Rome, where marble arches and crowded forums buzz with rumors louder than a modern comment section. Romans love their politics, their spectacles, and above all, their omens. And when something streaks across the sky, a comet flaring its tail like a divine torchwell. That's headline news. Mainstream fact. In 44 BCE, just after Julius Caesar's assassination, a bright comet appeared in the skies for several days. The people took it as proof that Caesar's soul had ascended to the heavens. Augustus, ever the shrewd politician, embraced the narrative, stamping stars and comets onto coins to reinforce his own divine legitimacy. A glowing streak in the sky becomes free propaganda, celestial marketing at its finest. Quirky tidbit, Pliny the Elder, Rome's go-to encyclopedia guy, cataloged different types of comets with creative names. Some he described as blood-colored, others as spears or shields. Imagine him at a dinner party, sipping watered wine, saying with great seriousness, "Ah, yes, last week's comet looked like a swordfish." You try not to giggle. Historians still argue whether Romans truly feared these omens or simply used them as rhetorical tools. Politicians certainly leaned into the drama to declare a comet as a bad sign for your rival or a blessing for yourself. Either way, Rome never wasted a good omen. You picture yourself standing in the forum on a hot summer night. Citizens gather, craning their necks as a comet blazes. Vendors pause their bread selling. Senators mutter nervously. And someone probably shouts, "The gods are angry." Soldiers glance at each other, wondering if this means their next campaign will be cursed. Even if you're skeptical, the sheer weight of collective belief makes your heart beat faster. And then there are eclipses. In 431 BCE, during a solar eclipse, Roman armies reportedly panicked before battle, refusing to fight until priests performed elaborate sacrifices. You can almost smell the incense and charred offerings rising to the gods, meant to coax the sun back into its rightful place. But Romans also had a practical streak. They consulted augurs, yes, but they also recorded these events meticulously. They weren't just terrified. They were building a cosmic archive like librarians of the skies, standing at the edge of the Colosseum. The moon high above, you realize how Rome, like Greece, straddled myth and observation. A comet could be a weapon, an omen, or a divine calling card. What mattered wasn't its scientific reality, but the story attached to it. And no civilization told stories with more flair than Rome. Asterisk, you drift east now, past deserts and steppes, until the night sky arches over China's ancient capital's Luoyang. Chang'an city's alive with lanterns and incense smoke. Here, the heavens aren't just admired. They're inspected, cataloged, and filed away with bureaucratic precision. You feel the hum of order in the air, the quiet clatter of bamboo slips being written on by court astronomers, who serve emperors with as much loyalty as any soldier. Mainstream fact. The Chinese kept some of the world's most detailed astronomical records, stretching back thousands of years. They noted not just eclipses and comets, but the exact times, locations, and even changes in brightness. These records later helped modern scientists piece together cometary orbits, including Halley's Comet, tracked across centuries. Quirky tidbit, sometimes court officials were punished if they failed to predict celestial events. Imagine being hauled before the emperor because you didn't foresee a lunar eclipse. "Sorry, Majesty, my calculations were off by an hour," and suddenly your job security vanishes quicker than the moon's glow. No pressure. Historians still argue whether Chinese astronomers believed in omens themselves, or simply reported what emperors wanted to hear. Many records frame comets as signs of dynastic change if one appears. It's often interpreted as heaven expressing disapproval of the current ruler, convenient if you're a rebellious noble looking for a cosmic excuse. You stand in the imperial observatory, stone instruments towering like ancient sculptures, gnomons, armillary spheres, bronze fittings glinting under torchlight. Astronomers shuffle in silk robes, dyed indigo and saffron, eyes fixed on the heavens. When a comet streaks across the sky, they bow slightly, scribbling notes that will be sent to the emperor by dawn. Outside the palace, common folk glance upward, nervously murmuring about famine, floods, or fortune depending on which storyteller they trust. Eclipses, to carry weight. Ancient Chinese rituals sometimes involved banging drums, firing arrows skyward, or clashing bronze vessels to scare off the celestial dragon thought to be swallowing the sun or moon. You imagine the noise echoing across tiled rooftops, a city unified in clamor, half terrified, half exhilarated. The sky here feels both vast and intimate, like an emperor's personal diary written in light. Every glow, every shadow, every comet, tale is logged with the care of a royal secret. You realize that for the Chinese, the heavens weren't just a backdrop, they were part of the machinery of state, another tool in maintaining the mandate of heaven. And as you watch a pale comet fade beyond the horizon, you sense how these records weren't just superstition. They became a bridge carrying knowledge across centuries, a thread tying ancient wonder to modern astronomy. Asterisk, you cross oceans now, slipping into the humid jungles of Central America, where the night sky presses down with a velvet weight. Maya, masters of calendars and stone-carved observatories, stare upward not for idle curiosity, but for survival. You sit on the worn steps of a pyramid temple, fireflies drifting in the thick air, while priests in feathered cloaks pace in measured circles, their eyes fixed on the stars. Mainstream fact: the Maya could predict eclipses with startling accuracy. Their codices, painted on bark paper pages, included eclipse tables that tracked lunar and solar cycles across centuries. To them, these weren't curiosities, but cosmic events woven into rituals, politics, and even warfare. Quirky tidbit: Mayan eclipse rituals sometimes involved bloodletting. Rulers would pierce tongues or ears, offering drops of blood to ensure the cosmos stayed balanced. Imagine your boss asking you to cut yourself every time there's a lunar eclipse. Ancient HR departments must have been interesting. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely symbolic or whether the Maya genuinely believed the sun and moon would vanish forever without them. Either way, an eclipse wasn't something to be watched with a lawn chair and a pair of glasses. It was a crisis that demanded human action. You picture an entire city gathering in the plaza as the sun begins to dim. The heat shifts, shadows sharpen, and a collective gasp rises from the crowd. Priests raise incense burners, fragrant smoke curling upward, while drums and conch shells thunder to scare away cosmic monsters. Children press close to their mothers, and even hardened warriors glance upward with unease. The air itself seems to tighten, as if the world is holding its breath. When the sun returns, cheers ripple through the crowd. Life can go on, maize will grow, rivers will flow, and the gods, placated with blood, smoke, and noise, will allow another day to dawn. The Maya also tracked comets, though with less enthusiasm. Some records suggest they saw them as bad omens, fiery intruders that disrupted the orderly dance of planets and stars. Two people who built calendars precise enough to shame modern procrastinators. Comets felt like gatecrashers at a carefully planned party. Sitting under the tropical night, you sense their obsession with cycles, the rhythm of Venus, the repetition of eclipses, the turn of seasons. To forward the Maya, the sky wasn't just above. It was a clock, a prophecy, and a warning system all in one. And when something went wrong, a comet blazed or an eclipse swallowed the sun, the only answer was ritual, a desperate attempt to push the universe back into its proper orbit. The air cools now as you step into the stone courtyards of medieval Europe. where monks in rough wool habits shuffle under the weight of candlelit manuscripts. Above them, the night sky stretches wide and unfamiliar, for here in the Middle Ages, heaven is never just a backdrop. It's a message board, and everyone is nervously reading. Mainstream fact. Chronicles from this period are packed with references to celestial omens. Comets appear in margins next to kings' deaths. Eclipses are noted alongside famines. And strange halos around the moon are blamed for everything from Viking raids to bad harvests. A monk in England once described an eclipse as the sun's face darkened in sorrow at the sins of men. You can almost hear the quill scratching judgment into parchment. Quirky tidbit. In 1066, the year of the Norman conquest, Halley's comet blazed across the sky. The Bayeux tapestry even shows a stitched comet above fearful crowds, like a medieval meme embroidered into linen. Imagine peasants staring upward and muttering, "Well, that can't be good." Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly trembled at these events or whether fear was stoked by clergy eager to fit celestial signs into sermons. Some accounts suggest eclipses were viewed with awe, but not universal panic, while others describe people throwing themselves into prayer as if the world were ending. You find yourself standing in a muddy village square where townsfolk whisper nervously as the sky darkens. Chickens roost midday, dogs howl, and farmers cross themselves quickly. Bells toll from the church tower. Not to announce danger, but to steady frightened hearts. Monks chant psalms, voices echoing against stone walls, weaving human sound into the eerie hush of a dim sun. Comets, meanwhile, are often painted as fiery swords, divine punishment looming over a sinful world. One chronicler claimed a comet looked like a dragon's tail. Another insisted it smelled of burning sulfur, though you suspect that might have been the latrine nearby. Yet even in the gloom, there's curiosity. Monastic libraries slowly gather classical texts, whispering of Aristotle and Ptolemy. Knowledge is fragile, but the seeds of rational astronomy are kept alive in quiet cloisters. You imagine a monk? Spectacles perched awkwardly on his nose, daring to wonder if the heavens follow rules rather than whims of wrathful deities. As you leave the cloister, the candle smoke still clinging to your cloak, you realize medieval skies weren't just feared. They were bridges between divine and earthly, between terror and wonder, between ignorance and the faint stirrings of science. You wander forward in time, into an age of polished brass and polished egos. The Renaissance. The air smells of ink and varnish, of smoke rising from new forged cannons and incense still clinging to cathedral walls. It's a world teetering between medieval awe and modern curiosity. And when the heavens flare, when comets blaze, or the moon slides into shadow, the response is a strange cocktail of fear and fascination. Mainstream fact, with the invention of the telescope in the early 17th century, astronomers like Galileo began observing comets with fresh eyes. No longer just fiery swords in the sky, comets became natural phenomena to be measured, sketched, and debated in thick Latin treatises. Yet despite the math, pamphlets still warned that comets signaled plague or war, and villagers clutched rosaries, just as tightly as their ancestors had. Quirky tidbit. One 16th century observer described a comet as a star with a broom. Imagine the heavens sweeping its dusty floor while peasants below mutter nervously about whose life might be getting tidied up next. Historians still argue whether this period truly marked a shift toward rational astronomy or whether fear of omens remained just as strong under the surface. Galileo insisted comets were sublunary vapors, clinging stubbornly to Aristotle's old view, while Tycho Brahe, with his gleaming golden nose, charted them as objects moving beyond the moon. The debate itself shows how unsettled the line between science and superstition still was. You picture yourself standing in a crowded square in Florence, merchants hawk cloth and spices while overhead, a comet flares across the twilight.
Nice.
Point upward, arguing in animated Italian. Priests lead prayers, children gape wide-eyed, and off to one side, an enterprising bookseller distributes hastily printed broadsheets warning that the comet foretells the death of some unlucky monarch. The Renaissance might be rebirth, but old habits die hard. Eclipses provoke equally dramatic reactions, Royal courts call on astrologers to forecast their meaning, while ordinary villagers gather in nervous knots, whispering about famine or fortune. Yet in observatories funded by wealthy patrons, men with parchment and quills sketch carefully, noting phases, timings, shadows, the seeds of real predictive astronomy.
Wow.
You breathe in the strange duality of this age, candlelight. Flickering beside telescope lenses, horoscopes beside star charts, fear beside curiosity. The heavens no longer belong solely to priests, but they don't yet belong entirely to scientists either. They hover, like the comets themselves, in a liminal space, half dread, half wonder. Now, you find yourself stepping into the crisp air of the Enlightenment, where wigs are powdered, coffeehouses hum with chatter, and telescopes gleam like prized toys of curious minds. Here, comets and eclipses are no longer whispered about as dragons or fiery swords. They're written about in journals, mapped with mathematical precision, debated with the kind of earnestness only philosophers fueled by too much caffeine can muster. Mainstream fact: in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Isaac Newton and Edmund Halley reframed the very idea of comets. Halley calculated that the bright comet seen in 1682 would return in 1758 AD. Bold prediction that proved correct. When the comet reappeared on schedule, it wasn't seen as doom but as triumph. Math had tamed the heavens. The universe was beginning to look less like a divine drama and more like a giant, orderly clock. Quirky tidbit: despite this rational turn, pamphlets continued to warn of disasters tied to comets. In 1744, a six-tailed comet appeared, sparking rumors that it was the Comet of Catastrophe. In London, hawkers sold comet pills claimed to protect against illness brought by the celestial visitor. Imagine someone shoving a pamphlet at you in a coffee house. Buy these pills, they keep the comet germs away. You'd sip your coffee a little faster. Historians still argue whether the Enlightenment truly ended superstition, or whether it merely shoved it into the corners of public life. Even as philosophers toasted reason, ordinary folk still peeked nervously skyward. Convinced that eclipses could twist crops or foretell war, you stroll through a Parisian salon where candlelight flickers against gilt mirrors. A comet has appeared outside, and instead of prayers, people gather at windows with notebooks. The air smells of perfume, ink, and roasted chestnuts. Gentlemen debate Newtonian physics, while ladies joke that the comet must be gossiping about them. Yet across town in a poorer quarter, neighbors bang pots and mutter prayers just as their ancestors once did. Eclipses now draw crowds of curious onlookers. Instead of priests chanting, you see men adjusting crude smoked glass or peering through lenses. Yet fear lingers. In 1780, Benjamin Franklin noted how even in America, eclipses stirred unease, despite growing scientific explanations. You can almost hear him chuckling wryly, quill scratching, while neighbors whisper anxiously about whether the heavens are angry. This is the age of duality: precision calculations in one hand, pamphlet prophecies in the other. You sense the balance tilting toward science, yet superstition refuses to vanish entirely. And as a comet fades beyond the rooftops, powdered wigs tilt skyward, still wondering if the universe has a sense of humor. You step into the modern world now, where the night sky feels familiar, yet still carries echoes of ancient awe. Street lamps line boulevards, observatories rise like temples of glass and steel. Comets are announced not by trembling priests, but by headlines and hashtags. Still, when a streak of light slices across the heavens or the sun vanishes midday, people pause, just as they always have. Mainstream fact: by the 19th and 20th centuries, astronomy transformed omens into predictable phenomena. Comets were cataloged, eclipses plotted years in advance, and observatories invited the public to witness what their ancestors would have fled from. When Halley's comet returned in 1910, astronomers confidently tracked its path, but panic still spread when word got out that Earth would pass through its tail. Newspapers sold stories about comet gas suffocating humanity. Sales of gas, masks, and comet-proof umbrellas spiked. Even in the machine age, the old fears had a knack for surviving. Quirky tidbit: in 1999. During a solar eclipse in Europe, some towns closed schools to keep children indoors, while others turned it into a festival with themed snacks and souvenirs. You imagine medieval monks shaking their heads from the beyond, once prayers and sacrifices, a chocolate bar shaped like the moon. Progress tastes sugary, apparently. Historians still argue whether we've truly moved past the language of omens. After all, how often do modern headlines call events apocalyptic when the sky puts on a show? Even now, some groups insist eclipses or comets foreshadow disaster. The difference is that science offers calm reassurance. Its shadow, dust. And light not gods in combat or dragons on the loose. You picture yourself standing on a hill in the present day, city lights glowing faintly behind you. A crowd has gathered, families with folding chairs, astronomers with tripods, kids waving glow sticks. The moon edges across the sun, casting a sudden twilight. Gasps ripple through the crowd. But instead of fear, there's wonder, laughter, the clicking of cameras. When the diamond ring of light flares, applause breaks out, as though the cosmos just performed an encore. From Babylon to Egypt, Greece, to Rome, China to the Maya, monks to modern stargazers, the thread runs unbroken. The sky speaks, and humans listen, whether in terror, ritual, or curiosity. The heavens have always been our partner in storytelling, and as you lean back, letting the cool night air settle, you realize that comets and eclipses haven't lost their power, they've simply changed. Costume. From fiery omens to scientific wonders, they still command us to look up, to pause, to feel small and connected. Now the story softens, and so does the night. The comets fade back into their long orbits, the eclipses drift into shadowy memory, and the sky resumes its steady rhythm of stars. You can almost feel the hush of centuries folding over you, like layers of parchment gently closing. The Babylonians. With their clay tablets, the Egyptians banging drums for Ra, the Greeks bickering in marketplaces, the Romans weaving omens into politics, all of them dissolve into the same quiet sky you see tonight. The Maya with their incense smoke, the Chinese astronomers with bamboo slips, the monks with their quills, the Enlightenment thinkers with telescopes, all voices blending into a chorus of wonder, even now, with apps on your phone that tell you exactly when and where the next eclipse will appear. There's still something deeply human about stepping outside, craning your neck, and watching light slip away. For a moment, the world hushes, and you feel yourself part of a chain far older than your own life. Let your breath slow as you picture the sky above you, endless, calm, carrying whispers of ancient fears and modern awe. Let the rhythm of history settle like a blanket, soft and steady, reminding you that every age has looked upward, searching for answers, finding both dread and comfort in the same glowing arc. Close your eyes and imagine the comet's tail dissolving into twilight, the eclipse brightening back into day. The sky is no longer sending warnings, it's simply offering stillness. And in that stillness, you drift, carried gently, securely, toward rest.